many or most members of Congress have pro-Christian sensibilities, and they think Christianity is good and that the other religions are not good for the country. So that shows you how they're abusing their office. That whole land sale was an abuse of their authority.
Well, let's go through the land sale very quickly. And there was a government, it was a military group of individuals that put the cross up.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't?
No, it
please
wasn't.
correct me.
It was a private religious group who put it up, not for military reasons. The military excuse came later.
Oh, it did?
And that often happens, like in San Diego, the Cross San Diego. It wasn't
Soledad Cross.
Yeah, the Soledad Cross wasn't a war memorial, but later, when it was challenged, then they start calling it a war memorial, because who's against honoring the fallen, right? You know, and the cross in the Mojave Desert was ruled unconstitutional because it was private cross on public property, and so the government then passed a law to sell off a little piece of that cross to private property, which then the government could say, hey, we don't own it anymore, so you can't accuse us of violating state-church separation. But that whole shell game was a sham. In fact, we wrote a friend of the court brief too in that. You know, it's like a clue, just like an ugly thing to do for the government to try to get around the law. In fact, by selling it the way they did, they were admitting that the government should not be owning a religious monument. Well, the end of this long story is that the U.S. Supreme Court bought that argument. The U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, that's not government property anymore, so it's not a violation of state-church separation. So it can stay where it is. Same thing happened in La Crosse, Wisconsin. It's really ugly. The Ten Commandments used to stand in the middle of the park, and everybody would go. In fact, a lot of atheists wouldn't go to the park because of that. Why is there 10 Commandments? Now there are 2 wrought iron fences around that thing. A little like postage stamp size piece of the park. There's a fence around it that the Eagles, who quote unquote bought it from the city, and then the city has a fence around it with a disclaimer on it. So there's this like double ugly thing in the middle of the park so that they could maintain it there in public property. But that little piece of property is not public property anymore. Well, the same thing in the Mojave Desert. That's no longer public property. So when we drive by, when somebody drives by it and doesn't even know, they think they're out in this federal preserve, and they see a cross on the hill, how do they know that's private property? How do they know that's not government speech?
One of the decisions for the cross says that it is not a Christian depiction. It doesn't depict religion. It's a memorial to our fallen soldiers. And I don't know if any Christian would actually say, well, let's go to a war memorial and put up a cross that depicts simply all of the fallen soldiers of all denominations. And not denominations, but all religions.
Well, in the oral arguments to that case, Justice Scalia, I can't quote the exact thing, but
you can paraphrase.
The idea was that Justice Scalia was taking that exact argument, saying that he can imagine Jews putting a Christian cross on top of their gravestones, because it doesn't mean Christian. It's just a symbol for somebody who's died, right? Of course, I don't know any Jew. I don't know if you know any Jews
or any other religious
who would say that that cross symbol, that T-shaped Roman Catholic cross symbol, is a general depiction of somebody's memorial.
Well, what would be the American flag, of course.
Well, it could be your own religion. The Jews would put a Star of David, right? The humanists could put that happy H sign, and the Wiccans could put a pentagram, maybe. So whatever you want to put.
Well, are there any other current lawsuits? You said you have 8. What's the most predominant one?
We have one that's still under the radar a bit, but it's a big case. It's the housing allowance for ministers of the gospel.
Ooh, tell me about that.
Right now, under the IRS, ministers of the gospel, and you can put that in quotes, which includes not just Protestant and Catholic, but also includes rabbis, anybody who does a sacerdotal function, rabbis and cantors. Ministers of the gospel, if their church gives them a housing allowance or a place to live on the property, right, like a parsonage, they don't have to report that as income. It's excluded from income. It's a parsonage allowance or housing allowance. And it came to light a few years ago when Rick Warren, the Orange County pastor, the guy who prayed at Obama's inauguration, It turned out that he was having his entire salary at the time paid to him as a housing allowance. It was like $80,000 a year. I don't know about you, but $80,000 a year would buy for for rent would be a big place. He was sued and he lost, and they grandfathered it in, so he didn't have to pay any back taxes. It now at least has to be fair market value. You can't just have your whole salary paid. He was trying to get around the law. He was cheating, basically, playing the system in excluding income. So the way it stands now is that if you're paying rent or you're paying a house payment and your church can at least put it in the minutes that part of your salary is designated as a housing allowance, then not only do you not report that, it's just excluded. You don't even have that income. So it lowers the tax liability of any clergy in the country or anybody who does sacerdotal functions. And it's been horribly abused. Cantors at a synagogue who do weddings, so they would come under that. But it's even been extended to a basketball coach at a Catholic high school. They're considered ministers, right? This tax break is there. A lot of people are taking it. And in addition to that, if you're paying a mortgage, if a minister of the gospel is paying a mortgage with this excluded income that doesn't have to be reported, they can also deduct the interest on the mortgage, just like anyone else can, right? So they're double dipping. They're getting a huge advantage, a huge tax break. So we're challenging that. We think it's unconstitutional. There is a lot of precedent. There's a wonderful constitutional scholar named Chemerinsky who's done a lot of work on this, who was ready to sue in the state of California, but then had a conflict of interest and couldn't continue with it. So we're going ahead with this. Some clergy have tried to intervene into the case because they know it would hit their pocketbook. A lot of churches are worried about this because they're going to have to compensate their clergy more since the clergy aren't getting this break. We think it's unfair. It elevates the clergy to this kind of special privileged class. Back in the theocracy, the clergy were like a special class of people. The head of the American Red Cross or the head of any other charitable organization or our group, we don't get that break. We're running a nonprofit charitable organization with a cause. Why do clergy have this unfair advantage and someone like Annie Laurie or I, not that we would want it, but you see the point, right? Why are they getting this break and the rest of us aren't? It's an unfair advantage to religion. It's not going to be newsworthy until like Judge Crabb on our National Day of Prayer. When she issued her decision, then suddenly, bang, a federal judge is taking away our freedoms. So if we win on this case, you'll be hearing about it.
Interesting.
Maybe this year.
Well, it's time for us to conclude our episode this time. Thank you very much once again, Dan, for sharing with us. Good luck with your FFRF lawsuits. And I think that you're doing a very good thing to keep separation of church and state, and also to support all the secular communities in America. I think you're doing a very good thing.
Thanks. Thanks for the invitation.